In today's lesson, we're going into the underbelly of Dharma and Reckoning Day. And I am taking a bunch of these slides from a workshop I did before on deepening your integrity for potential Body Thrive members. So you may have already seen some of this there, but I want to show the context of this in terms of Reckoning Day. So just to align us, this that we're after, because we're going into reckoning day. It's the tough time, right? It's when there's a part of us that's actually going to die. That's what we're going to get into is what ego death looks and feels like, and how to midwife actually that process. You may have heard of death midwives, and I just want to remind us of why it's worth it, because you get to experience the next level of your integrity with time, with money, with your heart, your care, your joy, your ease, and your energy. So I've just got to say it's worth it. Okay, we're going to talk about part of you is going to die here, and it's worth it. And I just want to show you like the smiley, happy pictures that we often see. Is we often see this growth path, and these are some examples of growth path. Like here I am. This is all I've done. Look, world, I'm amazing. And we see a lot of this on social media, where there's just like this like sort of like happy, amazing thing. We often don't see the reckoning days in each other. We're often a little bit, I would say, sheltered from this. And so I just want to make sure that we get this. And I'm going to go through all my happy, smiley growth pictures before we go into this, just so that you get like there's this, the reckoning days are behind the scenes of all this. Here's me in my kitchen cooking with my family. Here's Indy doing her practice. She's a thriving child, right? Here's me with a good friend from growing up in Winston biking in Salt Lake. Here's me with the tribe and in Rapid City. Here's my view, which I'm looking at right now out of my window. Here I am teaching, my favorite thing to do, coaching, being with my members, you all. Here's what it feels like when we're collaborating as a group. Here's me with Tammy Simon, one of my I would say esteemed colleagues who I've looked up to for decades, probably 3 decades now. Here's me with Donna Farhi, who invited me to her retreat. Right? It's all the shiny, happy growth path stuff that we often see. And I'm going to show a picture too of plants. Like here's thistle going into my juicer in its thrive state, right? It's a springtime picture. It's happy, it's alive, etc. And what we often don't see is the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. There's me on my treadmill desk and dealing with probably some fairly heavy issues. So let's talk about what dies. So what does your Dharma want from you in the next chapter of your life? And what I want to say here is Dharma wants more from you than you've ever given. Okay? uh, Dharma wants beyond who you've been. And so when we get that there's outdated shadows or patterns that need to die. And we're going to do a deep dive into some mythology today to really ground us in Reckoning Day. And then I'm going to give you some seed questions to answer, and not just now to answer, but when you know you're in it, when you know, like when you're having the hard time, when you're in the numbness, when you're in the confusion, when you're in the discontent, the anger, the irritation, the frustration, when you've given up, right? I want you to come back to this and realize that it's not just all about these, the shiny, happy pictures, right? That we all have stuff going on behind the scenes. And Dharma desires more from us than we've ever given. And so it's going to bring us to our knees, right? It's going to bring us to our knees at times. And that's what I call Reckoning Day. So we're going to get a little bit into that. So Reckoning Day is, if we look at the biblical sense, it's the time when we're being judged, right? When there's an evaluation of what's really going on. And then based on that, there's a consequence or an action. And it's intense, right? That whole idea of Reckoning Day, which is not just in Christian mythology, but it's in a lot of mythology, right? Where there's this time where everything's exposed. And we're going to get into that in the goddess traditions. So this is the deal. Only you can decide to journey deeper into integrity. And many people falter in this and they decide not to. They decide it's too much work. They decide it's too hard. They decide it's not worth it. But that's also really limited then, right? Because then you can only like redo what you've already done in the past. And I know for anyone here listening, that's not what you're interested in. So the big question that starts off, that kind of kicks off Reckoning Day at deeper levels is what are you resisting? What is your ego? What's it resisting? What doesn't want to die? What patterns are not really going to serve, but are ripening? And that's all part of this resistance. And in this process of reckoning day, we're going to need to look into and to actually to look at it like full judgment. Everything's on the table. All the cards are out. We're going to have to look at that resistance. All right, so we're going to cover a bit around how Dharma and integrity work, why your identity, why it actually gets reshaped from exposing shadows. I find this really fascinating in these goddess myths, how the goddess is her role, her identity, who she thinks she is, and how others see her is very different before and after reckoning day. And to me, that's it's very powerful to recognize that. Like we have myths, we have stories to help us understand that we're all gods and goddesses. We're all going to go through these trials and tribulations in order to step into our next level of power. And that's very much what Reckoning Day is beckoning you towards. How to pick up the clues from your body, your mind, and your intuition. And we'll also talk about the easiest way through tough terrain. And my sense is the questions really are that the questions will help bring you through the tough terrain. Otherwise, what happens is we can get lost. Right. And we see this. Many of you know friends that or colleagues that were really on this path and then kind of got lost and or kind of got disoriented and stopped. Right. And so we're going to look at all of that in this little quick workshop. So a little bit on how Dharma works. So and this is all stuff that I'm making this up. So FYI, all this I'm making up a lot of stuff and I'm pulling from a lot of just great stories and fantastic people who've done a lot of work on the heroine's journey. So some of this is made up, which usually means synergized from other great thinkers out there. Okay, so Dharma is consciousness moving into action from source. So if we think of Dharma as something that's, our Dharma can feel really personal, but it can also feel very much beyond ourselves. And so if we can look at Dharma in this way of it's beyond, it's us and it's more that it's coming from consciousness and it's just charged with energy and that this Dharma speaks through the language of our intuition and it's going to dissolve our shadow. It has to dissolve shadow to get aligned action. So powerful. Reckoning Day is a result of outdated patterns that Dharma can no longer tolerate for your next level of growth. Reckoning Day requires surrender to digest outdated patterns. Once dissolved, you have stronger rhythm, deeper integration with source energy, and intuition to affect positive change. I hope this is helpful. That might be a slide worth printing for some of us that are like in that process and just to remind us of an orientation. That's all that this is. It really is an orientation. All right. And so this, we're going to talk a little bit about Inanna's descent into the other underworld. And I'll tie in some of also the mythology from Persephone and Demeter. All right. So the alchemy of Dharma is remembering. It's a re-putting together of your unhealed, untapped self through integration. You become your potential. So if there's part of ourselves that have, again, it's a way that they're unconscious or subconscious and they're malaligned or underdeveloped, they get exposed. And we'll talk a little bit about this in terms of what this looks like. I love this image of the fallen angel. And this downward energy is what we're going to follow. So a lot of the downward emotions that arise on your path to Dharma, on your path of creating who you are becoming, on the path of going after your goals, going after your smarts, right? What happens is there's this depressing emotion that arises that will start to expose the shadow. And this image, again, kind of reminds me of that, like when it's too much. And there is a mourning that's happening, and the mourning that is happening is really your ego is dying, and there's a part of the self that's mourning that you can't go back to who you were before. You can't go back to being unconscious of outdated patterns in yourself. When we get that this is a universal story, that it's not personal, that reckoning day doesn't just happen to you, that can be very powerful to see like, okay, this is a pattern. It's a pattern in the human psyche, and there's a power in that pattern that we can apply to our life right now. All right, so this is Inanna. She's the queen of heaven and earth. This is ancient mythology. It's about 2000 BC. She's the goddess of fertility and love. You can see she's got her wise owls and she's standing on her four-legged animals. All right, so they say grain spills from her womb. Like she's this fertile, amazing, empowered goddess, and that's how the journey begins. And what happens is she it's fascinating, really, the story. I'm going to say she's called to visit her sister. This is Ereshkigal. This is Ereshkigal of Sumeria. This is her sister, who is the queen of hell. So we have queen of heaven and we have queen of hell, these two sisters. And hell is obviously deep, 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 deep below the earth. And in this we can see there's levels and layers of the underworld. And so Reckoning Day right here, this is where Reckoning Day is the pit of hell. And this is where Ereshkigal resides. This is her queendom. And her husband dies. And Inanna is called from the heavens to descend down into the underworld. And when she does, and Inanna, there's some different, some fascinating parts of the story. And again, with ancient mythology, there's some different versions, right? Because it's amazing. These stories that have survived 4,000 years, it just blows my mind. Uh, there's a version that she was actually looking for some more power. Like she wanted to not just be Queen of Heaven, if you know what I mean, and she was looking to basically check out what was going on there and maybe usurp some power from below, which is fascinating. They say like she went in to this gate, right? There's this gate, which is the gate of fate, the gate to the underworld, which is where Earth meets the underworld. So we have all this stuff happening above the upper world. That's all the kingdom of air and space and fire, the sun, right, up there in the heavens. And then there's this gateway into water, into the underworld. And at that gate, she arrives there like pretty like I'm the boss, I'm the woman in charge. And Aresh Kagel knows she's coming. Here's Aresh Kagel, right? She knows that her sister's coming. This is fierce, huh? Look at that. Whoa. She's got like bones coming off her back as like quick weapons. She's in mourning too. She's in this really deep pain, and her sister arrives at that gate. She gets word that her sister arrives with a bit of an attitude, and so she has her gatekeepers actually right here at the gate of fate. And this is important to realize that there's a sense with Dharma that you're fated to your Dharma, right? It's non-random, and it will require you to become more than you are, right? And so at this gate of fate, Anana shows up somewhat, the gal in charge, somewhat haughtily, and her sister immediately has her servants, her gatekeepers, strip Anana of her power, and the first thing that they take is her jewels. And then the next thing that each one of these gates to the underworld, Inanna has to surrender another level of self. And there's actually it's kind of fascinating. There's some parts of the myth that I've heard that she actually has to surrender not just her jewels and her swords and that kind of thing, but she actually has to surrender her robes. And then she actually has to surrender parts of her physiology. So she's kind of unwinding her physiology as she's descending down, down, down into hell. And there's some that say like she arrives without any flesh. She's just bones and spirit by the time she gets to this this very bottom pit, and she's naked and she's alone. And her sister Eresh Kagel, right? Her sister sees her, and Inanna still hasn't surrendered. She still is not really deeply empathetic to her sister who's just lost her husband. And so Eresh Kagel, she picks her up, this like bony spirit, and impales her right through the power chakra, right through her third chakra, and she impales her on a stake. All right, we have the stake and and now she's this corpse lying over the stake. And that is Reckoning Day. Right, like, oh my gosh, are you serious? Like that's Reckoning Day. That's how you know you're at the bottom of the pit, right? Is when you are nothing. You are no longer a thing. You no longer know who you are. You no longer really remember why you're doing what you're doing. It's total disorientation. It's total surrender. Uh, and at this point, Inanna needs some help, and there's ways that she gets help. There's these little mice in the underworld who are Inanna's actually Inanna's servants, and they go back up to the surface world, and they get some help. And so soon help comes, and Inanna is resuscitated. When Inanna is resuscitated, she's no longer quite so haughty. All right. So in this image, it's this part. It's number 6. Death. All is lost. Things get worse. There's no hope. She's failed and accepts defeat. Uh, to me, it's quite fascinating how in the human psyche we need to come to this complete surrender, and it's painful, right? I mean, there's nothing shiny and fun about death, and that's why I showed you those images in the beginning, because we do see all these like social media happy growth images, and we don't see the despair, the deep despair that's behind growth. We don't see these really intensely painful moments of when we realize we don't have what it takes to become what Dharma's asking us to become next. And when we're in that process, like when we're in that deep, when we're dealing too with like our deepest regret, the painful regret, where we know we had choices in the past and we made decisions that were misaligned, and we maybe even knew we were doing that, right? Or we did things that really hurt people. You know, to me, the story of Inanna is she was actually hurtful to her sister. She wasn't empathetic. She wasn't connected. She wasn't empowering her sister. She was actually trying to take something that wasn't hers. She was acting in a masculine paradigm and not integrated in her feminine receptivity and nurturance and that wholeness. She was operating from a sense of, if you will, from a sense of duality, that I want more power and I'm going to take it from someone I love. And to me, this is quite fascinating because there's a lot of things that Dharma will call out in order to propel the next level of integrity. And there's a lot of our shadow issues, whether it's around money, whether it's around ethics, whether it's around how we're showing up in relationship. There's something that we need to learn. In the process of learning that in this goddess mythology is so painful. And this pain, if we can survive it, if you will, like if we can be present, and that's how we survive it, is we're present through it, it becomes our power. It transforms, it alchemizes into power. So I just want to show on this is death is lost. And then the next stage, and this is so fascinating, is until there's that surrender, until there's that acknowledgement, until there's that reckoning with ourselves. The reckoning isn't other people with you. Yeah, you're going to get feedback, and that's going to help you reckon. That's how we get to reckoning day, is we're receiving feedback. We're receiving feedback from our own intuition. When you know those little things that are off that you do. We receive feedback from other people who tell us like, hey, this isn't working for me. This isn't working for us. This thing that you're doing isn't working any longer. We receive feedback, if you will, from the universe or the cosmos through things not going as we think they should. And to me, this is so important, right? So there's this point where we get into that surrender, where we're willing to look eyes wide open, no longer protecting the shadow, no longer interested in supporting the shadow. And in this, we're giving up a known future because the shadow we are familiar with. It's a sense of self, it's a part of identity. And when we give up that, when we say, like, okay, I'm no longer going to do that pattern, and in that, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. Like, really. And if you don't get to that point, you haven't surrendered. And it's this willingness that Dharma needs. It's this willingness for this next level of intuition to be able to guide and to move in. And so at that point, once we get through there, and I'm going to go through a number of questions that'll help us process reckoning day, that'll help us get into it and move deeper through it. And it is a very deeply reflective process, is that once we've gone through it, and it's very personal and individual, I got to say, like, yes, you can help each other with accountability partners with this, but at some point, reckoning day is you and you. It's your higher self evaluating, judging your current identity self structure that has that shadow. And it's in that exposure in yoga, it's that prakasha vimarsha, like the light shines out, the reflection is back. It's that self-reflective awareness we call the vijnana in yoga, right? Where it's like that reflective awareness, that it's you reflecting on where patterns in you can no longer be tolerated by Dharma. And it's sad, I've got to say. Sometimes it's given through feedback. I've had people call me out in ways that were so upsetting to me because they were so true, right? And that's how you know, right? You're like, yeah, I really need to become more whole, integrated, healthy in that way, in that aspect. And so once that's happened, then fascinatingly enough, and not until then, like a gate is unlocked. It's a pivot, it's a turning point. That depth of honest surrender. If it's not honest, it doesn't work. It's part of the shadow still. But when it's completely honest, completely exposed, let thy will be my will, let my will be thy will, right? When we're there at that point, now actually we're receptive. Until then, we're not, right? Not at this level of integration that we're talking about. So then we're receptive. Once we're receiving, we can receive what? We can receive guidance, we can receive support, we can receive next level intuition. Often too, we can actually receive more information, feedback from others that will point the way towards growth. So at this point, we actually let someone give us a hand in an honest way. So now we'll talk about how Inanna gets rescued. Before her descent, Inanna prepared her strategy for her rescue and instructed Ninchubar, who is this entrusted executive of Inanna, to carry out instructions if she didn't appear from her journey after 3 days. She had foreknowledge that she would need help if she got stuck in the underworld. Ninchubar was this entrusted executive Ananda, providing evidence of this organization. Ninchubar means Queen of the East, is a female handmaid or vizier of the great goddess. She's the earthly executive arm of Ananda, called whenever she needs help or assistance. So psychologically, Ninchubar is said to embody or represent the small part of us that stays above ground while the soul descends, and still conscious and functioning aspect of the psyche, which can witness the events below and above and feel concern for the fate of the soul. Ninchubar is the spokeswoman of the self, the one who has heard Anana, who keeps track of the days, and who cries out of her deep feeling that the goddess must be roused. And what Sylvia Brenton Pereira says is that Ninchubar is a model of women's deepest reflective of the self, priestly function, one which operates as simple executrix of the self's commands, often when the soul is most threatened. In the poems mentioning her, Ninchubar has no life of her own, no specificity beyond her capacity to serve. She simply carries out precisely and competently what the goddess asks of her. In her profound, egoless obedience, she is almost invisible. Indeed, she dresses like a beggar at Inanna's visiting. Yet on the faithful servant, Ninchubar's integrity and reference and capacity for action depend the turning in the myth, the turning which restores the reborn Inanna to the world of the great above. As the goddess says in the poem, it is she who saved my life. Inanna tells Ninchubar to first go to the sky god Enlil, the high father of all, then to Nanasin, her own father, the moon god, then to Enki. Why does she not send Ninchubar to her mother or to Ninhursag, the earth mother? The poets of her culture saw Inanna already and unfortunately valuing masculine power more than that of the mothers. And it's important here to remember that Inanna gives Ninchubar the instruction before she goes on the descent. And so this is reflective of the part of her that needed to be reckoned with, the part of her that needed to die in the myth is this seeing the masculine as all powerful, disregard for the feminine. Perhaps it is because she is the god's Herodile, or perhaps she feels the greater cultural potency. In any case, in her search for the necessary attitude to help her in extremis, she is wrong in her first choices. She seeks at first in seemingly powerful, but actually incapable or ungiving sources. The two sky and moon gods refuse to and or dare not rescue Inanna from the place of stuckness and death in the underworld. They embody impersonal patriarchal respect for law and order, too far away from the modality of both their daughter Inanna and the dark feminine. They see Inanna as merely ambitious, one who craves too much. They see her through the projection of their own bull-like shadow. And they cite the rule that, quote, one who goes to the great dwelling stays there. End quote. They seem almost spiteful, glad that she got her comeuppance. It is such a way of to do. They seem almost spiteful, glad she got her comeuppance. In just such a way do the superego and those living by the tidy laws retaliate against or abandon those individuals and appetites daring to move beyond collective conventional confines. There is no help for the wayward from the powers of control. So to me, this is really fascinating, right? Because this is where often we go looking. This is something we talk a lot about in the courses, how we go looking for support where we can't receive it. And this pattern too must die. So I'll tell you who saves her and what happens next. From Descent to the Goddess by Sylvia Brinton Pereira, who's a genius. She talks about this part with Enki, who is the one that actually helps Inanna out. And she says there's only one father in the descent myth who is helpful, Enki. His name means Lord of the Earth, like Poseidon. He is the wily water and wisdom god, ruling the flow of seas and rivers. He lives deep in the abyss. In several myths, he is especially close to Inanna. In this myth, he initiates the process of her release. Enki is a remarkable divinity. In summer, his waters were equated with the engendering powers of semen and amniotic fluid, right? So he's like the potency of the life force. He's generative, creative, playful in the empathetic male. Like Mercurius, he includes the opposites and has no abstract boundedness to the principle of law. Although he is said to have the power of me, those ordering principles of the upper world and civilization, his order is creative, not static, and preservative. He is the culture bringer, not the preserver of the status quo. And this is really important because where the other masculine figures at this in this story or in this time are very much the legal system. They're the structure, and he's the creative. He is the creative principle. His wisdom is that of improvisation and empathy. Now, this is very important for the next phase beyond Reckoning Day when we go into the creative. It says, Enki's consciousness is like that of the second chakra, Svadhisthana, where trust in life and the self is the wisdom of the maternal waters, end quote. The trust, fluidity, ecstasy, and lubricating acceptance of what is, qualities of the second chakra's mode of consciousness can heal the static ills of the first chakra. And this is where that old structure, that old earth structure of the ego has to be dissolved. And it's dissolved through water, through creativity, through empathy. Enki's wisdom flows with, breaks up, it releases the inertia and the rigidity of the underworld. All right, so then it goes on and says that he is this creative sculptor god. He's the image fashioner. He's the one of the creators of men in contest with Earth Goddess, in which they made various forms of life from clay. When she created deformities, he found roles in life for them to fill. Endlessly, he improvises. To me, this is so important, this improvisational life force, because it's really showing us that there's not a right way out of it. It's improvisational. Everything can be used for something. He improvises to create what the moment needs. He cares little for the rules and precedents of the high principled patriarchal gods, and thus is often called upon to get them out of difficult impasses. Isn't that fascinating that we need that flexibility of water? He often mediates between the world of the fathers and the feminine. Always he flows creatively with life and therefore holds the possibility of totally restructuring the system. And to me, that's so important because that's really what's happening. Dharma to me is restructuring who you are going to become next. And once we can surrender to that, we can actually allow help, right? And that's what Enki's role is in this part of the myth, is he's going to help. Okay, so rather than abiding by the precedents and laws, he initiates a new process. And he does so by resorting to what was hitherto ignored. He moves with feeling. And if we go back to that first slide, right, about this feeling, right, this desire, right, that there's a component of desire to Dharma, and it's this feeling that Enki now brings to the table for Inanna. And so how does he free Inanna? He takes some dirt from under his red painted fingernail, insignificant, rejected, even previously invisible stuff, remnant of the larger creative process. Earth is the element of Muladhara in Ereshkigal. It is the embodiment stuff which corresponds to the energy of matter and the meat Inanna had become to the underworld. It is also the silt of Enki's riverbeds and clay that was primary building material of summer cities and of the tablets on which cuneiform writing was preserved. It is the material through which Sumerian culture incarnates and witnesses. In myth, it is what men and women were created from, right? We're created from dirt. He takes the dirt from under his fingernail. And this is also analogous to, she says, prima materia, unpremeditated, raw, basic reactiveness, open to all possibilities, because it is the same stuff as the creator God's creative medium. So to me, this is fascinating, right? It's like out of nothing, which is what Inanna has become. She's become dead. Enki, the god of water, wisdom, and creativity, takes stuff out of his fingernail, right? He takes clay to shape the next becoming. And to me, this is so important for us to get that there's this rebirth. That's this part of the cycle that's absolutely primal. And it can really feel that way. We can feel it's like after a good cry, like everything's been stripped and we feel raw and bare. And it's out of that. That is the building material for this next level. Again, I'm reading, it is thus the basic emotional material of the analytic process, as of all life. Its vast potency is hidden in the small, potent, autonomous flickers of emotion, the gripping, vibrant, and painful concrete details, the compelling fantasies that nearly slipped by or were concealed. The dirt under the nail is like the autonomous psyche as it is revealed in the small, personal here and now, affect-laden facts that are not grand and proof of effective performance in ways the superego would prefer, but the despised slag of life's processes, solid, subtle, capable of radically changing the analytical perspective. Okay, so it's out of that he creates these two little servant mourner figures, a Kalator and a Kurgara. These are described as sexless devotees, neither male nor female, and they go down, they creep up to Ereshkigal unchallenged through the gates like flies. They flew through the cracks in the door. They are humble. So important, right? Non-heroic creatures without definition or even the need to be separately defined, without any sense of what we would call ego needs. These little asexual creatures represent the attitude necessary to draw a blessing from the dark goddess. What they are told to do by Enki is just what therapists do in the abyss places that are pre-verbal and primal, where psyche and body meets on the borderline, where all is timeless and spaceless and the patterns of the magic level of consciousness hold. These creatures move in close to the goddess, ignoring the ways of upper world law and distance. Then they witness, this is so cool, listen to this, and they mirror with empathy rather than inflationary identification, which loses all sense of the separateness of I and thou. Theirs is a created capacity. They see and feel, and they groan with. Honoring the goddess, they express the suffering of existence that Ereshkigal now feels, for consciousness has come into her realm, and with it consciousness of pain. They affirm her in her suffering. They have been taught by Enki to trust the life force, even when it sounds its misery. Complaining is one voice of the dark goddess. It is a way of expressing life, valid and deep in the feminine soul. It does not, first and foremost, seek alleviation, but simply to state the existence of things as they are felt, to be to a sensitive and vulnerable being. It is one of the bases of the feeling function, not to be seen and judged from the stoic, heroic superego perspective as foolish kvetching and passive whining, but just as autonomous fact. That's the way it is. Enki's wisdom teaches us that suffering with is part of revering or reverencing. Enki's mourners moan with Ereshkigal. When she says, woe, oh my inside, they echo with her, woe, you who are Sai, our queen, oh, you're inside. When she says, whoa, oh, my outside, they echo with her, whoa, you who Sai, our queen, oh, you are outside. Their echoing makes a litany transform the pain into poetry and prayer. It makes out of life's dark misery a song of the goddess. It establishes art as a reverent and creative and sympathetic response to the passions and pains of life. And it shows the potency of such a litany, for with their mirroring song they ransom a goddess of life. From Ereshkigal pours forth not more but destruction, but generosity. The goddess of nature is grateful for the humble mirroring, the hearing, the song of herself. Precisely empathetic expression itself moves her. She answers the little creatures, whoever you are, because you have said, from my inside to your inside, from my outside to your outside. If you are gods, I shall pronounce a kindly word for you. If you are men, I shall decree a kindly fate for you. And this is huge because at this point now they are granted a wish. And from this wish, they grant the body of Inanna. And that's what starts the next phase of Inanna's growth. So, what happens next? In the Ishtar versions of the descent poems, Enki's way of approaching the feminine permits Ereshkigal to produce her essence, the water of life, which she holds in the underworld. In turn, the cause of the inertia towards its own life giving side, it stirs the tomb of bearing, shows us that the unconscious suffers and brings forth life. Like the Gorgon whose blood kills or heals, Ereshkigal can destroy or create and heal, depending on what attitude we take to the dark goddess. To me, it's so fascinating here, right? That deep empathy of our own mourning, of our own depth of loss and sorrow that happen in reckoning is what actually restores life. Ereshkigal, grateful for the reverent mirroring of the two sexless creatures, turns toward them, appreciates their helps, and grants reward. She offers the decree of a kind fate and the water gift, the rivers in its fullness, and the grain gift, the field and harvest. They ask for the corpse that hangs from the nail. That's Inanna. Ereshkigal, all knowing, names it, the corpse of your mistress, and she gives it to them. She is beneficent, transformed, generous. A miracle has occurred through Inanna's sacrifice and Enki's finding of the right attitude. The fertility of the bull of heaven that had died is reborn in the dark womb. All right, so what happens next is Inanna has to, there's a condition on Inanna's release, and that condition is that someone has to take her place. So someone has to remember, someone she is close to has to return to the underworld and to be there forever. And so what happens is Inanna recruits her husband, Dumuzi, who is found partying as a god in the surface world above, and he's been oblivious to the fact that she's been missing, and so she says, "You're going down there." So now this is her stepping into her power as feminine and masculine. And at this point, too, what happens is Dumuzi can split that with his sister, that fate with his sister, so they each spend 6 months below the underworld and 6 months above. And there's a lot of mythology in that. We see that really those same terms with Persephone. This is a Greek myth, a couple, I don't know what it is, maybe 1,000 years later, or something, where Persephone has to spend 6 months married to the king of hell, and then 6 months in the upper world with her mother. And this is what gives us the parallel of the seasons. It gives us the parallel of day and night. And it gives us this remembering that the darkness, the underworld, the grief, the dissolution, the pain, the suffering, that is part of the whole circle. That if we just try to reside in the everything's great growth world, that we're not actually integrated. Our psyche isn't integrated into the whole. So what we'll do next is go into some of these questions that help us get centered in Reckoning Day. What I suggest doing with these questions is I will read them and for you to listen and then press pause and journal. So this next section of this might take, it might take you an hour or so. So you might just come back to this point in the audio and do it. And then what I would do is journal and or draw or however you like to process, because it's just that we're just looking for this, again, almost this pre-conscious subliminal processing here. And it's also, again, like note this so that when you come back, you can come to this part of the audio. Okay, the first question is, what is the first question we asked in the beginning of this? What is your ego resisting? What is thy will or Dharma's will? What old pattern do you need to digest or dissolve? What do you need to surrender? What behaviors or attitudes will Dharma no longer tolerate? What must die for the next level of you to be born? How will you surrender? What does that look like? What does that feel like? How will you know when you've surrendered and are open to receive? How will you receive? What will you receive? From whom or from what? What does receiving from complete surrender feel like? What next actions are now apparent? And I'll end with saying that integrity emerges from darkness, that we want to plumb depth for growth. And out of depth comes the fruits. All right. And also remember that empathy is the healing water that comes from Reckoning Day. So when you're in it, reach out. Namaste.